beginnings of my adventures in architecture were like physically dangerous.
You have quite an interesting architecture journey. Like you studied at UCT for your undergrad, then you went to Colombia for your postgrad.
Yes.
Then you worked in Israel, you worked in Berlin as well. Can you just run me through that?
Those years, I remember the work was so intense at university, but the work was so intense and the hours were so demanding that it really took a toll on me.
Gregory Katz is a renowned South African architect who is based in Johannesburg. He has worked locally and overseas for some of the biggest names in architecture, and is well known for his unconventional architectural style, which blends the use of geometric shapes and materials in his buildings.
It's a very pressurized, demanding profession that we're in, and you need to manage your mental health.
What do you look for when you hire someone?
I look at the matric maths results.
Then when it comes to the CV and the portfolio, what do you look at? Let me just find the questions. So you own an architectural practice.
Yes.
What do you look for when you hire someone?
So there are some tangible things and there are some intangible things. So amongst the tangible things are, I look at the matric maths result. That's quite important. I look at the portfolio, obviously the drawings. I want to see that the candidate has the required skills and can bring skills into this office, things that perhaps we don't have here. Particularly kind of a comfort with using the computer. That's very important. Like the ability to learn new software and just not be intimidated by the software in the computer. But I'm also looking at the whole person, my wife was reminding me that, the candidate needs to have other interests besides architecture. I want to know that there's a whole person there. And other interests are very important to bring a kind of well-rounded character into the office. So like you, for example, doing this, I think that's incredibly valuable. So I'm asking questions to try and understand like who this person is, and will they fit well in this environment? Because it's not a big office. So I think in these bigger practices, you can kind of find a niche and make it work. But here, the dynamic is very close. We're all in one space and dealing with each other, in this kind of very intimate setting. And so the personality matters. There has to be a match there.
What's the importance in having a life outside of architecture?
I think that it makes for a well-rounded person, and I think that the interests and skills and benefits of having other interests manifest in the daily kind of life of a person, and we're in this environment. We're learning from each other. We're exchanging ideas. We're being who we are, and I think that a very kind of like narrow focus in life. It limits your creativity. Let's put it that way. I think that having more interests expands you as a person and expands your worldview. And I think architecture is more than just the discipline that is like we define as architecture. It's about really understanding the world around you and integrating your understanding of that world in your design process and practice.
Then when it comes to the CV and the portfolio, what do you look at?
So, I mean, like all architects, I'm very kind of like graphically driven, and I notice like whether people are as pedantic as I am around layout and graphics and how things are communicating graphically. So I'll obviously look at that. And that's not just about the portfolio. Even in the CV, you can see whether somebody cares about how things look. So there's an aesthetic quality that I'm looking for. And I'm looking for some originality. I'm looking for like someone who's kind of provoked and provocative by experiment and other thoughts. So yeah, I think that I'm looking for somebody who is kind of original in the way that they present themselves.
Would you say that, like I've heard from a lot of people on firms, that people just come out of undergrad don't necessarily know anything? Do you think that's true?
No. I want to kind of say that like this is a profession of ignorance. Like, you know, when I was starting out, I thought I knew more than I did. And the more you practice, the more you realize how little you know. And it's a constant refinement and learning. And so, in a way, there's a benefit to knowing less when you come here. I think that you've not formed some of the assumptions and bad habits that you may have formed, you know, further down the line. And so I kind of appreciate a level of naivety. I appreciate a level of questioning. What I'm looking for is intelligence. I'm looking for someone who's open to learning, someone who's open, who comes here with questions and is not afraid to ask them. That I think is an important dynamic in the office. That like it's a questioning environment. I never want to be the person who's like making executive decisions unchallenged, particularly in architecture, because the consequences of that are like, I think, poor built environment. You know, like you actually need to be challenged.
Yeah. Then this is much more personal about your journey. You have quite an interesting architecture journey. Like you studied at UCT for your undergrad, then you went to Colombia for your postgrad.
Yes.
Then you worked in Israel, you worked in Berlin as
Yes.
well. Can you just run me through that?
Yes. I mean, you know, I came of age at a time when, and I guess privileged social circumstances, where I was able to travel quite extensively, and I took advantage of that. I went overseas after studying at UCT, my undergrad. I went overseas and I got work for some like very progressive, I would say like avant-garde mentors, architects. I worked in studio Daniel Libeskind and for a guy named Zvi Hecker, who's a little less well known, but also like an incredibly imaginative architectural thinker and practitioner. And it was hard, you know, it required a lot of dedication. And that's also something that perhaps I learned from, that manifests in an unexpected way in the practice, because those years, I remember the work was so intense, you know, at university, but, you know, the work was so intense and the hours were so demanding that it really took a toll on me. And I come to the practice now with a kind of sensitivity to that. And, you know, I mean, like we seldom work here after hours. And I've got very clear boundaries about like how much energy is useful for me to put into the practice and where I need to step back and take a breather and allow some space for thought and for, I don't know, things to kind of unfold rather than just like pushing all the time. And then at Columbia, I went to Columbia University for my master's. That was in New York in the early 90s, which was a very exciting time to be in that place. There was a lot happening. Like New York was much grungier. It wasn't quite as grungy as the 80s, but it was just like coming out of that. Giuliani was just like the beginning of his tenure as mayor, so there was still some parts of New York that were quite rough around the edges, and being young and willing to kind of live in, let's say, squalid circumstances. We were squatting in lofts and had like a workshop with some tools, and we were making things. This is me and colleagues, other students that were at the university. And it was a time when I really was formative for me in engaging with making and materials and material production and material culture in New York at that time was a very rich experience and set me on a kind of a trajectory with my design thinking that I think bears out in the work that we do today. I came back to South Africa.
Why did you decide to come back?
So I was actually in South America when 9/11 happened. I was on a backpacking trip, and 9/11 happened, and then all the airports were closed. I was due to go back to New York, and just found myself back in Joburg because this was home and where one place that was open to me. All my clothes, books, the apartment I'd sublet, everything was left behind in New York. I've subsequently been back for visits, but that chapter in my life closed with a kind of hard close at that point, like a revolving door moment, one might say. And Johannesburg was very alive with possibilities and opportunities in the early 2000s. I got a job working on constitutional courts with Omen Design Workshop and Urban Solutions, and particularly around designing street furniture for the precinct, because that was kind of my interest and my skill set at the time, coming out of that, as I mentioned, that very kind of prototyping educational system or exposure that I'd had in New York. And so that was a very interesting start to my career here. I worked for them for a while and eventually branched off on my own with some small projects. And I've had my practice I've run this practice since 2006. So we've been going for almost 20 years, which is like unbelievable to me.
What sacrifices have you made when it comes to running this practice? I actually remember talking to your wife once, and she said there was a point where you both were living together, and like in the corridor of your old house, you would have like your plants on the floor and stuff like that.
We did start off very small, like, as I said, it was just me and the computer and one or two clients, and working out of even like the living room of our home. And then we migrated to the garage, and eventually we kind of built the structure that we're in now. So, but I don't really see that as a sacrifice. To me, there's kind of benefit in working from home, that I'm always around and I get to kind of be involved with the family and the kids and all of that, when I choose to. So I think that's been actually quite a pleasure for me in the circumstances that we practice. It's a very pressurized, demanding profession that we're in, and you need to manage your mental health. And when I'm with students, I'm very conscious, because I teach as well. I'm very conscious of the strain that students are under. I was under a lot of strain as a student, and in practice. And so I think that is something that we need to be aware of, cautious of, develop skills to cope with. At one point, I learned to meditate, and that helped me a lot. So I think that these are things we need to just be aware of and take care of as architects. Also, architecture is like it's a wonderful profession. It gives me so much. I'm so just like joyful to be an architect, but the remuneration is very patchy, given the amount of effort, work, years of study that we put in to become architects. And so, look, I've been, thank God, very successful. But there are times, particularly like when the economy crashes back in 2008, and I can remember other times where practice slows down. COVID was very difficult, particularly actually post-COVID, just those few years after COVID, because during COVID, we were actually finishing up projects that were previously in the works, but then there wasn't much new work initiated during COVID. So after COVID was very quiet. And so financial battles are a real thing, and you need to kind of ho fuss, as they say, and keep your head down, and good times come. It's just everything is very cyclical, and you have to believe that things change, and yeah, so that can be quite something to deal with as well as an architect. That can be challenging.
I'm sure, like when it comes to mental health, the stress of running a practice is very crazy. So,
Yes.
like, what gave you the courage to actually decide to take that sort of risk?
To do this, yeah. I often question this. Like I see colleagues of mine who work in other practices, bigger practices. They're established, and they have kind of economies of scale and connections. And because they're big, they're kind of doing projects of a certain scale that are maybe not available to a smaller practice. So I think that there are pros and cons of running your own small practice, but I wouldn't have it any other way. I wouldn't want to be somebody's employee. I'm very much an entrepreneur. I like to kind of like have my independence, and that's not just like daily independence. That's creative independence. There's a lot of benefits to being a sole practitioner or whatever. So I think that it's definitely suits me and serves me to run this practice. And yeah, you do need a certain amount of courage, or maybe naivete to do this. Like just when you're starting out, you think that you know everything, and therefore you kind of, you can call it bravery, but I may call it stupidity to start your own practice, because I've made so many mistakes along the way that I've hopefully learned from. But this is the practice of making an architecture and being an architect is one of constant learning, constant refinement, constant learning. And that, I think that's why they call it practice. Practicing architecture is the perfect word for what we do. I'm literally practicing every day, like trying to improve.
And this is the last question. If you could go on a time machine and teleport all the way to when you're doing matric,
yes,
what would you tell Greg?
Okay, so that in the vein of this idea of constant improvement, and even yesterday, I would have stuff to tell myself about how I could improve. But going that far back, I think that I was very hard on myself back then. And I think that had I been kind of kinder to myself, I think it would have helped me. So I think that's the bit of advice I would have given myself going back in time, to just be more accepting and value who you are. Yeah, I think that's the advice. It sounds very philosophical, I know, maybe unrelated to architecture, but that's where I am in life now, I guess, that like I'm seeing things in a kind of broader way.
Do you think like every sort of challenge or hardship or mistake has led to the point that you're at right now? I know like people normally have grand plans for how they want things to be. And sometimes things don't go to plan, but you realize that you end up being in a situation that led to something that was far better for you.
Yeah, like, I don't want to get all religious on you, but I believe that God puts us exactly where we need to be. I don't question that for a second. So, everything has turned out the way it has because of a plan and a design beyond my control. I'm playing a role, a very important role, but there are other forces at play, and I'm very thankful for where I am. There's an anecdote, and I'm not sure if you're going to include this, but I can tell you anyway.
Mm-hmm.
I was in first year of university at UCT, 6 months into my study, and I was way out of my depth. I think most people just do. You come into this field of study, and there's a lot to learn. The learning curve is incredibly steep. And I was getting ready for my first submission at the end of the first quarter at UCT, and I worked through the night. I was staying in res on campus, and I worked through the night, and I was exhausted the next morning carrying my first physical model I'd ever made up to campus. And I was crossing a road, a very busy road, and they'd actually made a footbridge over the road so that students didn't cross the road. Instead of climbing the footbridge, most students just dashed across the road because it was too much effort to walk up all those stairs. And I dashed across the road, but because I was so tired, I was disorientated, forgot to check, and a car came and hit me. And the model went that way, and my shoes went that way, and I did a somersault and hit my head. I was unconscious. It was a time when there were no cell phones, and the doctors were on their way to Grooterschuur, via the university off-ramp, and one doctor kind of overtook the traffic and loaded me into his car, didn't even wait for the ambulance, and took me to hospital, and may have saved my life. And look, my injuries healed, but for me, the beginnings of my adventures in architecture were physically dangerous, life-threatening. And my commitment to architecture didn't change after that. I didn't say to myself oh, this is too hard and I can't do this. I just persisted. And you need to persist in architecture. You need courage, and you need to stay the course, and it does pay off. So that's my advice to young architects and students out there: it's incredibly hard and painful at times, and requires a lot of commitment, but it's worth it.
Okay. That's it. This is probably my favorite shoot of all of the ones which I've done so far.
Oh, cool. Maybe because you know me.
I hope you found this video helpful and inspirational. Please click the video on the right for more videos on the channel.